Howdy, everybody. So, now that we have begun to enter into the content of our course, and we kind of have the basic layout of what it is that we're going to be doing this quarter, and I've also given you your very first assignments, the discussing questions on the interest inventory, and you've already started working on examining the Desserteau article. I'm very interested to see what your impressions of that are. I'm going to I'm going to start this lecture today with the habits of the creative mind reading. Because there are certain things that I really want, pardon me, there are certain things I really want to emphasize with this beginning. And I'm going to be referencing the sections called On Unlearning, and then the section called On Confronting the Unknown. Many of the things that you are reading in this intro might be similar or parallel to some of the things that we discussed in the first section of CTW1, right? The idea that this 5-paragraph essay and those rules that we learned, that conclusions need to provide a reiteration of the thesis, that the thesis needs to be in the last sentence of the first paragraph. Again, what we called these in the first quarter were training wheels. And Habits of the Creative Mind opens their text kind of with what it is that high school students have typically learned, and even college students have typically learned, and how we need to shift not necessarily the skill set, but the perspective and the rationale as to why we taught that way in high school and why we need to break it. So I wanted to share a couple things with you. If you wanted to follow along, I'm on page 18. When we tell students to unlearn the writing rules they learned in high school, and we talked about that in the first quarter of CTW, they often ask for something, anything, to put in the place of those rules. And I remember in the fall, some of you would come to my office hours, and knowing full well that I've already kind of thrown out the 5-paragraph essay trope, I remember one of you even looking at me kind of pleadingly and going, well, what do you want? And that is exactly what we want to get rid of, is this way that we have taught our students to perform for the teacher or to perform for the grade. And that kind of punitive system that we have in place is what we need to just toss out the window. I understand that we have grades, and I understand that you probably want to do well. But what you need to be thinking about instead of the grade is how you can cultivate a habit of the creative and critical mind that allows you to be inspired, and then resultantly, your writing will be reflective of that inspiration. And when you write with inspiration, you tend to just make better work. I think it's important for us to know. We start our students on a path toward developing curious and creative habits of mind by telling them that their writing should show their minds at work on a problem. And what that looks like on the page has everything to do with the following questions. How does your mind work? What are your mental habits? How do you know? And the more that we begin to cultivate the way our own mind is processing the phenomenon around it, is synthesizing what it observes, the more particular that scholarship is. And that contributes to culture. It is not writing the perfect 5-paragraph essay. Because if it doesn't somehow map the way that you are thinking, well, then what is it? Just a recapitulation of a collective idea? And isn't it the snowflake that is each of our minds and the way it processes phenomenon, how we begin to create a more complex and nuanced world? I know that this is your English comp class, but it's more than that. It's about the beginnings of cultivating this kind of nuanced, creative mind in the way that you observe the world. And we can do that by being aware of how it is we think rather than thinking how we should be writing to serve a prompt or to perform for a professor or to get that grade. Believe me, the best grades in my class have always been those who cultivated a unique perspective, did so clearly. Of course, you want to be able to write clearly so that you evoke your intention. But it was a fresh way of thinking about something. It delved into the complexity and accessed the way that you think as a person, which is what is so unique. On page 23, in the section on confronting the unknown, I think that this text really gets at what we want to aim for in this quarter. I'm going to read parts of this. Ultimately, each time a writer sits down to write, he or she chooses just how far to venture into that unknown territory, which is what all research-based writing should do. In fact, all writing should do. To our way of thinking, the writing prompt, properly conceived, is an invitation to embark into unmapped worlds, to improvise, to find unexpected beauty in the challenges that arise. We know from experience, though, that learning to approach writing this way takes practice, and without such practice, the writing produced in response to a prompt tends to reject whatever is unfamiliar and huddle around whatever is obvious and easiest to defend. And this is part of what we have learned in many cases in high school, that we try to create a tidy plot of truth based on our research. We even take out things that we find in our research that don't necessarily serve this kind of nice, tidy thesis. Bullshit. What we need to do is get out of that habit, because that little tidy argument that you make, that little tidy thesis, is one, not doing anything to contribute to the collective consciousness of our culture. But two, it's actually unethical, because largely, to create that little tidy plot of truth in that thesis, you are ignoring entire other pieces of information related to your topic that might somehow be contributing. But because it might feel a little oppositional, or it might negotiate your idea, it might qualify it, it complicates it. We think of that as being not serving the argument. But what you're doing is you're not serving the quest for knowledge. You're not serving the quest for complexity. Things aren't simple. They just aren't. And it's only a fool who kind of espouses that idea, that the simplest answer is the best one. We want to delve into complexity. And if that means that you have a vast plane of uncertainty for your research project, well, I think that's a lot better than a tidy plot of truth. Making this journey again and again is the essence of the examined life. The writing you do along the way tracks your ongoing encounter with the complexity of human experience. The more you do it, the more you know. And the more you know, the more connections you can make as you work through your next encounter with what is unknown to you. You'll never make it to absolute knowledge. Scientists have been trying forever. But the more you practice, the more comfortable you'll be with saying, I don't know, but I'm sure I can figure it out. That's what we want to do. We want to embrace the complexity of human experience. And while that feels a little uncomfortable because you're not going to be able to write this perfect paper that has an exact argument and answers the question. Well, hun, if we could answer the question, we probably would have long ago. Yeah? But that doesn't mean that we should abandon the quest for knowledge. They're very different things. What we want to do is focus on the process of gaining knowledge, not the product of proving or demonstrating the knowledge we have. The latter is static. The latter is dead. Let's investigate, even if it's messy. That will produce much more interesting work, mainly because your curiosity will resonate, will actually emanate from this research project. And you will go down a particular rabbit hole that no one else has done exactly. And that is the development of knowledge. That's what we want to do. That's what we want to do. So, why did I have you read Desserteau's Walking in the City? What a beast, right? What a challenging read. How the hell am I supposed to fully understand this text? Welcome to the world. This text is almost like a perfect metaphor for knowledge in general. And you might emerge from it being frustrated, or you don't fully get it, or you felt like you only got a little bit of it. But that little bit is you understanding it in a way that somehow reflects your own critical and creative mind. The way that you understand it is actually knowledge. We have to be okay with wrestling with that which is uncertain. We have to be okay with wrestling with information that isn't fully clarified. But our processing of it is actually something to celebrate because we do it in a unique way. So in the prompt that you're going to be completing that thinking paper with, I ask you, what is the difference between the flaneur and the voyeur? What are their virtues? Notice I don't say which one is better. You can certainly make that evaluation for yourself. But they both provide a function. And of course, I'm not going to explain it here because I want you to understand it in the way that you do. But this is one thing I want you to think about. Think of your research at first like a flaneur, like a walker. Then, once we accumulate information, we can then think more like the voyeur. But that somehow we, in your own variation, we somehow collapse both of these characteristics into our research project. And for that, we might do something surprising to ourselves. And that is what we want to do. Go into the unknown with the research. Ask the questions that you're even afraid you'll never find the answer for. Because that will send you on a journey that will be full discovery. And if you process that journey, it's going to be unique scholarship. And that's what we need to be doing. And that is also one of the reasons why that we are beginning from observation. Because it allows one to stay open to possibility. Instead of kind of defining your subject matter, like, this is what I'm going to do. Instead of that, you have kind of a topic in mind, and then you just spend a while allowing yourself to float through information and listen to the questions that you truly are asking. They might surprise you. allowing oneself to stay open to possibility in the research process comes to better material. So, what subject is most resonant with you currently? Of course, you're working on that interest inventory, right? But then eventually, you're going to have to choose a subject. And from that subject, you're going to have to spend some time observing. And that is your next discussion question, which isn't due till April 13th. But it's you just beginning to conceive of, okay, well, based on the kind of topic that's floating around in my head right now, based on the subject matter, I want to go down the internet rabbit hole. Where am I going to go? What am I going to observe? What sites seem to be related to my kind of barely forming subject? That's what you want to be thinking about. And you're going to be sharing that with us, because in that discussion, we can then see what kind of subject matter you're thinking about. Remember, you're not married to it. Look at the sites that you're considering as something to observe, but then people might be able to go, oh, I have another site that you might want to look at, or this reminds me of this idea. This reminds me of this. And the more that we kind of contribute to each other in kind of fashioning kind of a whole, kind of just a whole mindfulness around your subject by contributing our own knowledge and insight, you might be able to chisel away at the specifics of what it is that you will eventually do for your project. We're obviously in the very beginning stages, but we got to start somewhere, right? So after you do that interest inventory, then really think about, okay, well, what subject emerges and where can I begin my observation? Then, of course, you're going to be performing the observation itself. And this is your second thinking paper. I'm just going to read this. You obviously have some time for it, but I just wanted to kind of get you in the mind. You will be engaging in observation of a site or sites related to your topic for your final research paper. And you're going to be writing descriptive notes as a means to both assist you in determining your research focus and then dynamizing the reading experience of the research. So the exercise is to practice not only denotative description, which you all are very familiar with, but also to employ reflexivity into your observations in ways that will contribute to authentic guiding questions and analysis in your research. Okay? And reflexivity is the idea that while you are observing objectively, you're also understanding how you are judging the moment, how you are evaluating the observation, letting in those betrayals of bias, that kind of thing, and paying attention to that, because it is in that reflexivity that we begin to ask the true questions that we have, not the ones we think we should answer, but the ones that actually authentically emerge in the dissonance between trying to be objective and the feelings that we have. That right there is where the good stuff is. And so this thinking paper is basically kind of a mapping of your observations. And by writing out what you observe, the what and the what and the what, and then being reflexive at the same time, you might come to discover something. It allows you to kind of plumb the depths of your own observing. And that, of course, is where we get all of the best research questions, right? So the assignment is to spend 2 hours documenting what you observe, aka documenting the sites that you go on as you kind of scour the net if indeed you're doing a virtual one, right? You could, of course, do a physical observation. You don't have much to go on because we're in shelter in place, but you can certainly try if you wanted to just observe your little brother for 2 hours. Amazing that what you would find and discover in that. And so what you're turning into me, you can look at the thinking paper number 2 prompt, but what you're turning into me is a brief report of this observation that includes the more salient aspects of the observation, like notable elements, the ones that you found most relevant, patterns that you began to notice, either linguistically or visually, or the way the information is being presented on the site. And then to also include any reflections and questions that emerged from that observation. Really dedicate quite a bit of this reflection that you're going to be doing to the questions that emerged, because that, of course, is the kernel for what eventually becomes kind of the blooming sensibility of whatever this research project is going to be. Okay? If you have any questions about that assignment, you're welcome to reach out to me, but it's pretty self-explanatory in the prompt. And I mean, you have some time for it. It's not even due until next Thursday or next Friday, something like that. But I just wanted to kind of go over it so that you could be thinking about what your site or sites are going to be. For now, though, complete that interest inventory, turn in the Desserteau reflection or thinking paper 1, and keep kind of considering, what am I going to be going down the rabbit hole this quarter for? At least as a beginning. Have a great day, everyone.